The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as Prince William adjusted his casual navy blazer, his mind already focused on the day ahead. Today was different from his usual royal engagements. Today, he would be accompanied by his eldest son, Prince George, on a visit that would mark a significant moment in the young prince's understanding of the world beyond palace walls. Catherine had kissed them both goodbye at breakfast, her eyes reflecting the same mixture of pride and concern that William felt. At 11 years old, George was old enough to begin learning about the responsibilities that would one day be his, but young enough that the harsh realities of life could still shock and sadden him. William remembered his own first encounters with homelessness during visits with his mother, Princess Diana, when he was just a boy. The memory of those experiences had shaped his perspective on duty and compassion in ways that formal education never could. "Are you ready for this, George?" William asked as they settled into the back of their official car. The security detail had been briefed to maintain a respectful distance during their visit to the Passage, a day centre for homeless individuals in central London that William had supported for over 2 decades. George nodded solemnly, his blue eyes reflecting a maturity beyond his years. "Mummy explained that we're going to meet people who don't have homes like ours," he said quietly. "She said it's important to understand that not everyone is as fortunate as we are." William smiled at his son's earnest response, recognizing Catherine's gentle guidance in those words. She had spent considerable time preparing George for this visit, explaining the concept of homelessness in age-appropriate terms while emphasizing the dignity and worth of every person they would meet. As their convoy made its way through London's busy streets, William pointed out landmarks to George while simultaneously preparing him for what lay ahead. "The people we'll meet today have had different experiences than us," he explained. "Some may have lost their jobs, some might have been ill, and others may have had difficult family situations. What's important to remember is that they're all human beings deserving of respect and kindness." The Passage had been a cornerstone of William's charitable work since he first became patron in 2019, though his connection to the organization stretched back much further. He remembered walking through these same doors as a young man, guided by staff who patiently explained their mission to provide not just immediate relief but pathways to independence and stability. Today's visit had been planned meticulously. The center's CEO, Mick Clark, had worked closely with William's office to ensure that the experience would be meaningful for both father and son while respecting the privacy and dignity of the individuals they served. Regular visitors to the Passage had been informed about the royal visit, and those who felt comfortable participating had agreed to share their stories. As they approached the building, George pressed his face to the window, taking in the modest exterior of the Victorian-era structure. "It doesn't look like much from the outside," he observed. "Sometimes the most important work happens in the most unassuming places," William replied. "Your great-grandmother, Diana, taught me that some of the most profound experiences come from connecting with people whose lives are very different from our own." The car pulled to a gentle stop, and William felt the familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with responsibility that accompanied these visits. He had learned over the years that authentic engagement required him to set aside his royal persona and simply be present as one human being connecting with another. Mick Clark greeted them at the entrance, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. A former rough sleeper himself, Mick had worked his way up through the Passage's programs to become a powerful advocate for those experiencing homelessness. His personal journey from the streets to leadership had made him an invaluable bridge between the royal family and the community they served. "Your Royal Highness, Prince George, welcome," Mick said, extending his hand first to William and then kneeling slightly to meet George at eye level. "We're honored to have you both here today." George shook Mick's hand with the careful politeness he had been taught, but William could see the curiosity in his son's eyes. This was likely the first time George had met someone who had experienced homelessness firsthand, and the normalcy of the interaction seemed to surprise him. The interior of the Passage buzzed with quiet activity. The main hall served multiple functions throughout the day, transforming from a breakfast space to a place for various workshops and activities. The atmosphere was one of purposeful dignity, with staff and volunteers moving efficiently while maintaining the warm, respectful interaction that defined the organization's approach. "Before we meet some of our visitors," Mick explained as they walked through the reception area, "I'd like to show you how our services work together to support people on their journey off the streets." They began in the Housing Advice Center, where trained counselors worked one-on-one with individuals to navigate the complex systems of housing applications, benefit claims, and documentation replacement. William had visited this area many times before, but seeing it through George's eyes reminded him of how overwhelming the bureaucracy could seem to someone already struggling with the basic challenges of survival. Sarah, one of the housing advisors, was working with James, a man in his 50s whose quiet demeanor and careful attention to the paperwork spread before him spoke to both determination and desperation. With Mick's gentle introduction, Sarah explained to George how something as simple as losing an identification card could become a nearly insurmountable barrier to accessing housing. When someone doesn't have an address, Sarah explained patiently, it becomes very difficult to get the documents they need for work or benefits. We help people navigate these challenges step by step. George listened intently, his young mind trying to process the complexity of systems he had never had to consider. What happens if they can't get their papers? He asked innocently. James looked up from his forms and met the young prince's eyes with remarkable gentleness. Then, you keep trying, young man, he said simply. People like Sarah here make sure you're not doing it alone. The sincerity of James's response seemed to strike George deeply. Here was a man facing challenges the boy could barely comprehend, yet speaking with dignity and even kindness about his situation. It was George's first real glimpse into the resilience of the human spirit under difficult circumstances. Moving through the center, they visited the training kitchens where visitors learned culinary skills that could lead to employment opportunities. The instructor, Maria, was herself a graduate of the Passages programs, having rebuilt her life after a period of homelessness following a family breakdown. Cooking gave me confidence again, she told George as she demonstrated knife skills to a small group of students. When you can create something good, something that nourishes people, you remember your own worth. William watched his son absorb these conversations, seeing the way George's questions evolved from simple curiosity to deeper concern. When they observed a literacy class where adults worked patiently to improve reading skills they had never had the opportunity to develop, George asked quietly, "Papa, why didn't they learn to read when they were children like me?" It was the kind of question that got to the heart of systemic inequalities, and William chose to answer honestly. Sometimes children don't have the same opportunities we've had, George. Some might have had to leave school early to help their families, or they might have moved around too much to get a consistent education. What's important is that they're working to improve their situation now. The visit to the medical center proved particularly impactful. Dr. Elizabeth Commons, who volunteered her time to provide healthcare to the Passages visitors, explained how homelessness created a cycle of health problems that made it even harder to find stability. When you're sleeping rough, she told them, simple medical problems can become serious. A small cut can become infected without proper care, or chronic conditions like diabetes become dangerous without consistent treatment. George watched as she tended to a man with a badly infected foot, her gentle professionalism creating a space of healing in what could have been a moment of humiliation. The man, Peter, had been living in doorways for 3 months after losing his job and, subsequently, his flat. His situation had deteriorated to the point where walking had become painful, making it even harder to search for work or access services. "The doctor is very kind," George whispered to his father. "Yes," William replied. "And notice how she treats Peter with the same respect she would give to anyone else. That's very important." As the morning progressed, the formal structure of the visit gave way to more natural interactions. William and George joined visitors for lunch, sitting at the simple tables and sharing conversation over the hearty meal prepared by the Passages kitchen staff. George found himself sitting next to Eleanor, a woman in her 70s whose bright eyes and quick wit belied the difficult circumstances that had brought her to the center. Eleanor had become homeless after her landlord sold the property where she had lived for 15 years. At her age, finding alternative accommodation had proved nearly impossible, and her pension wasn't sufficient for the high rental prices in London. Yet she spoke about her situation with a remarkable absence of self-pity, focusing instead on her gratitude for the Passages' support. "I worked as a nurse for 40 years, she told George proudly. "Helped bring dozens of babies into this world. Never thought I'd find myself in this situation, but life has a way of surprising you." George was fascinated by Eleanor's stories of her nursing career, asking questions about the baby she had helped deliver and the family she had cared for. William watched this interaction with deep satisfaction, seeing his son connect with Eleanor not as a homeless person but as an individual with a rich history and valuable experiences. "Eleanor is teaching me that everyone has a story," George told his father quietly during a break in the conversation. "That's exactly right," William replied. "And every story has value, regardless of someone's current circumstances." The afternoon brought them to the Employment Support Services, where the Passages team worked with visitors to develop job-seeking skills and connect them with potential employers. The program coordinator, Tom, was himself a success story of the Passages' holistic approach. 5 years earlier, he had arrived at the center after losing everything in a gambling addiction that had destroyed his marriage and career in finance. "The most important thing the Passage gave me wasn't just a bed or a meal," Tom explained to George. "It was hope. Hope that my life could be different, that my past mistakes didn't have to define my future." Tom's journey from visitor to staff member illustrated the transformative potential of comprehensive support services. His personal experience with homelessness made him uniquely qualified to understand the fears and challenges faced by those seeking help, while his professional background in finance allowed him to provide practical guidance on budgeting and financial planning. George was particularly impressed by the computer training area, where visitors learned basic digital skills essential for modern employment. Many of the people receiving training had been away from the workforce for extended periods and were struggling to keep up with technological changes. "In my day, you could walk into a shop and ask for a job," explained Robert, a man in his 60s who was learning to use email for the first time. "Now everything's online, and if you don't know how to use these machines, you're left behind." The patience and respect shown by the volunteer instructors made a strong impression on both William and George. There was no condescension or rushed instruction, just gentle guidance that acknowledged the courage it took for these students to acknowledge their need for help and take steps to address it. As the day drew toward its conclusion, William and George participated in an art therapy session led by volunteer counselor Amanda. The group was small, just 6 individuals working on various creative projects as a way to process their experiences and emotions. The room was filled with natural light from large windows, and the walls displayed artwork created by current and former visitors to the Passage. George was drawn to a colorful painting created by Marcus, a young man not much older than George himself who had aged out of the foster care system and found himself on the streets with no family support network. Marcus's artwork depicted a city street scene, but instead of focusing on the darkness often associated with urban homelessness, his painting captured moments of human connection and kindness. "I paint what I hope for," Marcus explained when George asked about his technique. "It helps me remember that there's beauty in the world, even when things are difficult." The conversation between George and Marcus was perhaps the most significant of the day. Here were 2 young people from vastly different backgrounds, yet their interaction was characterized by genuine curiosity and mutual respect. Marcus asked George about his interests and hobbies, while George wanted to know about Marcus's artistic inspiration and future plans. "I want to study art properly someday," Marcus shared. "The Passage is helping me get my qualifications sorted so I can apply to college. It feels impossible some days, but the staff here keep reminding me that lots of people have changed their lives, so maybe I can too." William watched this exchange with a mixture of pride in his son's genuine engagement and sadness for the circumstances that had brought such a talented young person to this situation. It reinforced his conviction that supporting organizations like the Passage was not just about charitable giving, but about investing in human potential that might otherwise be lost. As their visit concluded, Mick Clark gathered the staff and volunteers who had shared their time with the royal visitors. The mood was reflective rather than celebratory, acknowledging the serious nature of the issues they had discussed while recognizing the value of increased awareness and support. "Your visit today means more than you might realize," Mick addressed both William and George. "For many of our visitors, being treated with dignity and respect by people they see as important helps restore their sense of self-worth. But, more than that, your presence here sends a message to the wider community that these issues matter, that these people matter." George, who had been mostly quiet during the formal farewell, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Thank you for teaching me today," he said earnestly. "I didn't know about homelessness before, but now I understand that it could happen to anyone. I want to help too." The sincerity of his words moved several of the staff members to tears. Here was a child of privilege who had somehow managed to grasp the fundamental truth that homelessness was not a personal failing but a societal challenge that required collective response. As they prepared to leave, William reflected on the day's experiences and their impact on his son. The visit had achieved its intended purpose of education and awareness, but it had also sparked something deeper in George, a sense of social responsibility that would hopefully guide him throughout his life. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, with George processing the day's experiences and William giving him space to think. Finally, as they approached the palace gates, George spoke up. "Papa, why do we have so much when other people have so little?" It was the question William had been expecting, the one that cut to the heart of privilege and responsibility. His answer would shape how George understood his role not just as a future king, but as a human being in a world of inequality. "That's exactly the right question to ask, George," William said thoughtfully. "We've been given advantages that many people don't have, not because we're better than them, but because of the circumstances we were born into. What matters is what we do with those advantages. Do we use them just for ourselves, or do we use them to help make life better for other people?" George nodded slowly, his young mind working to integrate this new understanding into his worldview. "I think we should use them to help," he said finally. "I think so too," William replied, proud of his son's instinctive compassion. "And that's why visits like today are important. We can't solve everyone's problems, but we can listen, we can learn, and we can support the people and organizations who are working to make a difference." As their car passed through the palace gates, both father and son carried with them the faces and stories of the people they had met. The comfortable luxury of their royal residence would never look quite the same to George, who now understood that home was not something everyone could take for granted. That evening, as Catherine tucked George into bed, he recounted the day's events with an earnestness that surprised her. He spoke about Eleanor the nurse, Marcus the artist, James filling out housing forms, and all the staff and volunteers who worked so hard to help people rebuild their lives. "Mummy," he said as she was about to turn off his bedside lamp, "I want to go back to the passage someday. There's still so much I want to learn." Catherine smiled and kissed his forehead. "I think that can be arranged," she said softly. "And I think Papa would be very proud to have you as his partner in this work." Outside George's window, London continued its endless rhythm of life, including thousands of people who would sleep rough that night. But, in one young prince's heart, a seed of understanding and commitment had been planted that would grow into a lifetime of service to those most in need. 3 weeks after their visit to the passage, the impact of that day continued to resonate through the royal household in ways both subtle and profound. George had become noticeably more aware of social inequalities, asking thoughtful questions about the homeless individuals he occasionally saw during their public outings and expressing genuine concern for their welfare. Catherine noticed that he had started setting aside a portion of his pocket money, explaining that he wanted to help people like Eleanor and Marcus. William had been equally affected by watching his son's awakening social consciousness. The visit had reminded him of his own mother's approach to royal duty, the belief that genuine engagement with society's most vulnerable members was not just charitable obligation but essential to understanding the role of modern monarchy. Diana's legacy of compassion had been passed down to him, and now he was witnessing its emergence in the next generation. The royal household's senior advisors had taken note of the positive public response to the father-son visit. Media coverage had been overwhelmingly favorable, focusing on the authenticity of the interactions and the educational value of exposing young royals to social issues. More importantly, the passage had reported a significant increase in both volunteer applications and donations following the publicity around the visit. Mick Clark had called William personally to share the impact statistics. "Your visit brought us more than just media attention," he explained during their phone conversation. "We've had inquiries from 6 other major homeless charities wanting to collaborate on similar educational programs. There's something powerful about seeing a child engage with these issues that makes adults reconsider their own assumptions." This feedback had sparked an idea in William's mind. What if George's initial exposure to homelessness could be expanded into a broader educational journey? Rather than treating their visit as a one-off charitable engagement, they could develop a more comprehensive understanding of social issues through direct experience and ongoing relationship building. The opportunity to put this idea into practice came sooner than expected. Crisis, another major homelessness charity, had invited William to tour their new employment center in East London. The facility represented an innovative approach to addressing homelessness through intensive job training and placement services, with an impressive track record of helping people transition off the streets permanently. When William mentioned the invitation to Catherine over breakfast one Saturday morning, George immediately looked up from his cereal with interest. "Could I come too, Papa?" he asked earnestly. "I've been thinking about the people we met, and I'd like to learn more about how to help them." Catherine exchanged a meaningful look with William. They had both been impressed by George's sustained interest in the topic and his mature questions about social responsibility. After the success of the previous visit, they agreed that continued exposure would be valuable for his development as a future monarch. The Crisis Center was located in a renovated warehouse in Stratford, an area of East London that had undergone significant regeneration following the 2012 Olympics. The building's modern glass facade and open interior design reflected the organization's forward-thinking approach to addressing homelessness through comprehensive support services. John Sparks, the CEO of Crisis, greeted them in the bright reception area. A soft-spoken man with decades of experience in housing policy, John had built Crisis into one of the UK's most effective homelessness organisations through his emphasis on evidence-based interventions and long-term outcomes rather than just temporary relief. "Prince George, I understand this isn't your first time learning about homelessness," John said warmly as he shook the young prince's hand. "That's wonderful. Most adults never take the time to understand these issues, so you're already ahead of many grown-ups." George straightened slightly at this recognition of his growing knowledge. "I met lots of people at the passage," he replied. "They taught me that anyone can become homeless, and it's not their fault." John smiled at this response, recognizing the sophisticated understanding that George had already developed. "That's exactly right. And, here at Crisis, we focus on helping people not just find somewhere to live, but build the skills they need to stay housed permanently." The tour began in the assessment center, where newly arrived clients worked with counselors to identify their specific needs and develop personalized action plans. Unlike the drop-in model of many homeless services, Crisis operated more like a college, with structured programs and clear progression milestones. William had visited similar facilities before, but seeing them through George's eyes reminded him of how innovative these approaches really were. Traditional homeless services often focused on managing the crisis rather than addressing its underlying causes, but Crisis had developed a model that treated homelessness as a solvable problem rather than a permanent condition. Their first stop was the Digital Skills Classroom, where 12 individuals were learning basic computer literacy. The instructor, Patricia, was a former teacher who had volunteered at Crisis for 3 years after retiring from the education system. Her classroom management skills translated perfectly to working with adults who often had negative associations with formal learning. "Many of our learners haven't been in a classroom setting for years or even decades," Patricia explained as they watched students work through online tutorials. "Some never had positive educational experiences as children. We have to rebuild confidence alongside teaching technical skills." George observed the intense concentration on the students' faces as they navigated websites and practiced typing. One woman, Janet, was clearly struggling with the mouse coordination, her frustration evident as she repeatedly missed the icons she was trying to click. "This is really hard," Janet muttered under her breath. Without hesitation, George approached her workstation. "May I show you a trick?" he asked politely. Janet looked up, startled to see the young prince standing beside her. "You're moving too fast," George explained gently. "My computer teacher says to move the mouse like you're drawing a picture, very slowly and smoothly. Like this." He demonstrated the motion without touching her mouse, showing the smooth, deliberate movement that would give her better control. Janet tried again, following George's advice, and successfully clicked on the icon she had been targeting. Her face lit up with accomplishment. "Thank you, love," she said with genuine warmth. "You're a good teacher." The interaction was brief but meaningful, representing the kind of natural human connection that transcended social boundaries. William watched with pride as his son instinctively offered help without any sense of superiority or condescension. Moving through the center, they visited the construction skills workshop where clients learned trades that were in high demand in London's booming building industry. The workshop was equipped with professional-grade tools and materials, and the instructor, Dave, was a master carpenter who had spent his career in commercial construction before dedicating his retirement to teaching. The beauty of construction work, Dave explained as he demonstrated proper tool usage to a group of 6 students, is that you can see the results of your efforts immediately. When someone's been feeling worthless for months or years, being able to build something solid and useful does wonders for their self-esteem. The students were working on a project to build picnic tables for a local primary school, a practical application of their skills that would benefit the community while providing valuable experience. George was fascinated by the precision required for the measurements and cuts, asking detailed questions about the different tools and techniques. Michael, one of the students, was cutting boards for the table legs under Dave's supervision. A man in his 40s with calloused hands that spoke of previous manual labor experience, Michael had become homeless after a workplace injury led to extended unemployment and, eventual eviction. "I used to do factory work," Michael explained when George asked about his background. "Hurt my back and couldn't keep up with the physical demands. Been out of work for 2 years, but this program is giving me a chance to learn new skills that won't be so hard on my body." The conversation revealed the complex pathways that could lead to homelessness, not just addiction or mental illness, which many people associated with rough sleeping, but workplace injuries, illness, or economic displacement that could affect anyone. George was beginning to understand that homelessness was often the result of multiple factors converging, rather than single dramatic events. In the kitchen training area, they found another perspective on employment-focused intervention. The professional-grade kitchen was designed to replicate restaurant working conditions, complete with industrial equipment and health and safety protocols that would prepare students for real-world employment in the hospitality industry. Chef Maria Santos, who volunteered 2 days per week while maintaining her position at a high-end London restaurant, was leading a class on food preparation fundamentals. Her students ranged in age from 22 to 68, united by their commitment to building new careers in food service. "Cooking is about more than following recipes," Chef Santos explained to the class. "It's about timing, organization, working under pressure, and maintaining quality standards. These are skills that transfer to many other areas of life." George watched as the students worked in pairs to prepare a simple but elegant lunch service. The concentration required for proper knife work and timing created a focused atmosphere where personal circumstances seemed less important than immediate task completion. One of the younger students, Sophie, was working on sauce preparation with obvious talent and enthusiasm. When George complimented her technique, she beamed with pride. "I love cooking," she said simply. "Always have. Just never had the chance to learn it properly before." Sophie's story emerged gradually as they worked. She had aged out of foster care at 18 with few life skills and no family support network. A series of unstable housing situations had eventually led to rough sleeping, but her determination to build a career in culinary arts had brought her to crisis. "The program here is different from other places I try to get help," she explained. "They don't just want to find me somewhere to sleep for the night. They want to help me build a real life." This distinction between crisis intervention and long-term empowerment was becoming a central theme of George's education about homelessness. He was learning that effective support required addressing not just immediate needs but the underlying factors that created vulnerability to housing loss. The afternoon brought them to the life skills workshops, where clients worked on practical capabilities that many people took for granted: budgeting, tenant rights, conflict resolution, and healthcare navigation. These sessions addressed the reality that many people experiencing homelessness had missed crucial developmental opportunities during their youth. William found these workshops particularly moving because they highlighted the complex preparation required for successfully maintaining housing. Simply providing accommodation was insufficient if individuals lacked the skills to manage tenancy responsibilities or cope with the social pressures of community living. The session they observed was focused on budgeting and financial literacy, led by volunteer advisor Jenny Morrison. Jenny had worked in banking for 20 years before taking early retirement and dedicating her time to financial education for vulnerable populations. When you've been homeless, Jenny explained to her small group, money management becomes both more important and more difficult. You're starting over with very limited resources, so every pound has to count. The students worked through practical exercises calculating the true cost of various housing options, including not just rent but utilities, council tax, and household supplies. For many, this was the first time they had considered the comprehensive budget required for independent living. Anthony, a man in his 50s who had been rough sleeping for 8 months, was struggling with the mathematics involved. His education had been interrupted by family chaos during his teenage years, and decades of survival-focused living had left little opportunity to develop these analytical skills. George noticed Anthony's frustration and quietly asked Jenny if he could help. With her permission, he sat beside Anthony and patiently worked through the calculations, breaking down the complex budget into manageable steps. "You're really good at this," Anthony said with genuine appreciation. "I never was much good with numbers, but the way you explain it makes sense." The tutoring session evolved into a broader conversation about Anthony's experiences and aspirations. Despite the challenges he had faced, Anthony maintained a sense of humor and dignity that impressed both William and George. His goal was to find stable housing and reconnect with his adult daughter, whom he hadn't seen since his life had fallen apart following his wife's death from cancer. "Grief does strange things to people," Anthony explained matter-of-factly. "I couldn't handle losing her, and I made some poor decisions that led me here. But I'm not ready to give up on getting my life back together." This personal revelation highlighted another crucial aspect of homelessness that George was beginning to understand: the role of trauma and loss in creating vulnerability. Homelessness wasn't just about economic factors, it was often connected to emotional and psychological challenges that required comprehensive support. The final stop on their tour was the job placement office, where crisis staff worked directly with employers to create opportunities for their program graduates. The walls were covered with success stories, photos, and brief descriptions of individuals who had completed training programs and secured sustainable employment. Employment coordinator Sarah Williams had built relationships with dozens of London employers who were willing to give opportunities to people with non-traditional backgrounds. Her office was filled with testimonial letters from both employers and employees celebrating successful placements. "The key is matching people's skills and interests with the right opportunities," Sarah explained. "Someone who's been homeless isn't necessarily limited in what they can achieve, they just need the right support and opportunity." She introduced them to David, a crisis success story who now worked as a security guard at a major office complex in central London. David had completed the program 6 months earlier and was back as a volunteer mentor for current clients. "This place saved my life," David told George directly. "I was sleeping rough for 3 years after I came out of prison. Thought nobody would ever give me a chance to prove myself again. But crisis didn't just help me find work, they helped me believe I deserved it." David's transformation was striking. Dressed professionally and speaking with confidence, he bore little resemblance to what someone might stereotype as a formerly homeless individual. His success challenged assumptions while demonstrating the potential that existed within Crisis's client population. George was particularly impressed by David's role as a mentor. "Do you help other people like the staff helped you?" he asked. "That's exactly right," David replied. "When someone's at their lowest point, sometimes hearing from someone who's been there and made it through means more than all the professional advice in the world." This peer support model represented another innovative aspect of Crisis's approach. Rather than maintaining clear distinctions between service providers and recipients, they created pathways for successful graduates to remain engaged as mentors and advocates. As their visit concluded, John Sparks gathered the staff and volunteers for a brief reception. The mood was celebratory but focused, acknowledging the serious work being done while recognizing the positive impact of royal support. "Your visit today helps us in ways you might not realize," John addressed William and George. "Obviously, the media attention brings awareness to our work. But, more importantly, your engagement validates the dignity and potential of the people we serve. When society's most prominent figures treat homeless individuals with respect and interest, it challenges the stigma that often prevents people from seeking help." George had prepared a brief response, working with his parents to find words that expressed his genuine feelings about the day's experiences. Thank you for showing me how people can change their lives with help and hard work, he said earnestly. Meeting Sophie and Anthony and David taught me that everyone deserves a chance to succeed. I hope I can keep learning about these important things. The sincerity and thoughtfulness of his words moved many in the room. Here was a young person of extraordinary privilege who was developing genuine empathy and understanding for those facing difficult circumstances. During the drive back to Kensington Palace, George was quieter than usual, processing the day's experiences. William gave him space to think while reflecting on his own observations. The crisis model represented a significant evolution from traditional homeless services, focusing on long-term outcomes rather than short-term relief. Finally, George broke the silence with a question that demonstrated his growing sophistication about these issues. Papa, why do some people get help to change their lives while others don't? Is it just about finding the right place like crisis? William considered his response carefully, wanting to provide an honest answer that acknowledged the complexity of the situation without overwhelming his son. That's a really important question, George, he said. Places like Crisis and The Passage do excellent work, but there aren't enough of them to help everyone who needs it. Some people don't know these services exist, some might not be ready to accept help, and sometimes the waiting lists are too long. George nodded thoughtfully. So even when there are good programs, not everyone gets the chance to use them? That's exactly right, William confirmed. And that's why it's important for people in positions like ours to support these organizations and advocate for better policies that help more people. This conversation marked another step in George's evolving understanding of social responsibility. He was beginning to grasp not just the existence of problems like homelessness, but the systemic challenges involved in addressing them effectively. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, George excitedly shared his experiences with Charlotte and Louis, describing the various workshops and the people he had met. His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon his siblings were asking their own questions about homelessness and social issues. Catherine listened with satisfaction as George explained concepts like job training and peer mentoring to his younger siblings. His ability to articulate these ideas clearly suggested that the lessons were being integrated into his fundamental understanding of the world rather than simply memorized as abstract concepts. George is becoming quite the advocate, she observed to William as they tucked the children into bed later that evening. I'm proud of how seriously he's taking these experiences, William replied. He's not just going through the motions of royal duty, he's genuinely engaged with the issues and the people affected by them. Outside their windows, London settled into another night, including the hundreds of individuals who would sleep rough despite the excellent work being done by organizations like Crisis and The Passage. But, in the royal nursery, 3 young minds were developing an awareness of social responsibility that would hopefully guide them toward meaningful contributions to addressing these challenges. George's journey of discovery was just beginning, but already the seeds of compassionate leadership were taking root. The combination of direct experience, thoughtful guidance from his parents, and his own natural empathy was creating a foundation for the kind of engaged monarchy that could make a real difference in people's lives. As he drifted off to sleep, George's mind was filled with images of the day, Sophie's passion for cooking, Anthony's determination to rebuild his relationship with his daughter, David's transformation from rough sleeper to successful mentor. These were no longer abstract concepts but real people whose stories would stay with him as his understanding of royal duty continued to evolve. The autumn months that followed George's visits to The Passage and Crisis marked a period of deepening understanding and growing commitment to social issues that surprised even his parents with its intensity and sophistication. What had begun as an educational experience was evolving into a genuine passion that influenced how the young prince viewed his future responsibilities. George had taken to reading news articles about homelessness with Catherine's help, asking thoughtful questions about government policies and social programs that would have challenged many adults. His bedroom wall now displayed a world map where he had marked countries according to their homelessness rates, a project that had emerged from his curiosity about whether the problems he had observed were unique to Britain. The transformation in George's perspective had not gone unnoticed by his teachers at Lambrook School. His headmaster had mentioned to William and Catherine that George had delivered an impromptu presentation to his classmates about homelessness during a social studies discussion, demonstrating both factual knowledge and genuine emotional investment in the topic. He spoke about the people he had met as individuals with names and stories, the headmaster had reported. Rather than treating homelessness as an abstract social problem, he made it personal and real for his classmates. Several of them went home and asked their parents about volunteer opportunities. This ripple effect of George's advocacy among his peer group reflected the power of authentic engagement to inspire others. William recognized parallels to his own childhood experiences with Diana, who had understood that genuine social awareness often had more impact than formal charitable obligations. The opportunity to expand George's understanding came through an unexpected source. Dr. Rachel Morrison, a researcher at King's College London who studied youth homelessness, had reached out to William's office with a proposal for a different kind of educational experience. "Your son has had excellent exposure to services for adult homelessness," Dr. Morrison explained during a meeting at Kensington Palace. "But young people who are homeless face unique challenges that require specialized responses. If Prince George is serious about understanding these issues comprehensively, he should learn about how homelessness affects people his own age." The prospect of George meeting homeless young people initially concerned Catherine, who worried about the psychological impact of such encounters. However, Dr. Morrison assured them that the young people at Centrepoint, the UK's leading youth homelessness charity, were carefully supported and would benefit from the interaction as much as George would. Centrepoint's approach to youth homelessness focused on intensive support during a critical period when young people were most likely to either establish independence or fall into long-term street culture. Their residential programs provided not just accommodation but comprehensive life skills training, education support, and psychological counseling. William had visited Centrepoint facilities before, but never with George, and never with the specific focus on peer interaction that Dr. Morrison was proposing. The visit would be structured around a youth council meeting where current and former residents discussed policy recommendations they were developing for government consideration. On a crisp November morning, William and George traveled to Centrepoint's flagship facility in central London. The building's exterior was unremarkable, but the interior buzzed with the energy of young people engaged in purposeful activity. Unlike the drop-in atmosphere of adult homeless services, this environment felt more like a combination of student housing and community center. Say Yabakin, Centrepoint's CEO, welcomed them in the bright reception area decorated with artwork created by residents. A calm, thoughtful man with extensive experience in youth services, Say had built Centrepoint into the UK's most effective provider of youth homeless services through his emphasis on long-term outcomes and young people's voices in program design. "Prince George, we're excited to have you join our youth council meeting today," Say said warmly. "The young people have been looking forward to sharing their ideas with you and hearing your perspective as well." George straightened at this suggestion that he might have something valuable to contribute to the discussion. "I've been learning about homelessness, but I don't know very much about young people who don't have homes," he replied honestly. "That's perfect," Say responded. "The best way to learn is to listen to people who have experienced it themselves. Our council members are experts in youth homelessness because they've lived through it." The youth council meeting was held in a comfortable conference room where 8 current and former Centrepoint residents had gathered to discuss their policy recommendations. The group ranged in age from 16 to 22, representing diverse backgrounds and experiences that had led them to homelessness. Emma, 18 years old and the council's current chair, welcomed George and William with the confidence of someone accustomed to presenting to influential audiences. Her professional demeanor and articulate speech challenged any preconceptions about young people who had experienced homelessness. "We're working on recommendations for how the government can better support young people transitioning out of care," Emma explained as the meeting began. "Many of us became homeless after aging out of foster care, and we want to prevent that happening to others." The discussion that followed was sophisticated and policy-focused, with council members drawing on their personal experiences to identify systemic improvements. George listened intently as they outlined the challenges faced by young people leaving care at 18 with minimal life skills and no family support network. Jordan, a 19-year-old former resident who was now studying at university while volunteering with Centrepoint, explained the concept of practice independence, gradual transition support that would help young people develop necessary skills while maintaining a safety net. "When you turn 18 in care, you're supposed to be ready to live completely independently," Jordan said. "But most young people get support from their families well into their 20s. We shouldn't expect care leavers to manage without any help just because the government's responsibility officially ends. George was struck by the logic and fairness of this argument. That doesn't seem fair, he said thoughtfully. If your parents help you until you're older, then people without parents should get help too. The council members smiled at this straightforward assessment of their complex policy proposal. George's perspective as someone with extensive family support highlighted the inequity they were trying to address. Marcus, a 20-year-old who had been homeless for 6 months before coming to Centerpoint, shared his experience of trying to navigate adult responsibilities without preparation or support. His story illustrated how quickly circumstances could deteriorate when young people lacked practical skills and emotional resources. I knew how to read and write, but nobody ever taught me how to pay bills or talk to landlords, Marcus explained. When problems came up with my first flat, I didn't know how to handle them, and everything fell apart really quickly. The conversation revealed the multiple layers of vulnerability that affected young people experiencing homelessness. Beyond the immediate need for accommodation, they faced educational disruption, employment barriers, social isolation, and psychological trauma from their experiences. Aisha, a 17-year-old who had fled family rejection after coming out as lesbian, spoke about the additional challenges faced by LGBTQ+ young people. Her calm recounting of sleeping rough for 3 weeks before finding Centerpoint demonstrated remarkable resilience while highlighting the specific risks faced by sexual and gender minorities. Some young people become homeless because of who they are, not because of anything they've done wrong, Aisha explained to George. That's especially hard because the very people who should keep you safe are the ones who've rejected you. George's response to Aisha's story revealed the depth of empathy he had developed through his previous experiences. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said simply. Everyone should be safe with their family. The directness and sincerity of his response seemed to touch Aisha, who smiled warmly at him. Thank you for saying that, she replied. It means a lot to hear someone your age understand that. As the council meeting progressed, George became more confident about contributing to the discussion. When they talked about education support for homeless young people, he asked thoughtful questions about how they balanced school attendance with basic survival needs. It's really hard to concentrate on studying when you don't know where you're sleeping that night, explained Kyle, a 16-year-old who had been maintaining his A-level studies while experiencing housing instability. Schools don't always understand why your homework isn't done or why you're tired all the time. This insight prompted George to consider how his own educational experience was supported by stability and security that these young people lacked. Could schools do more to help, he asked. Emma nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly what we're proposing. Schools should have better training to identify young people at risk of homelessness and connect them with support services before they end up on the streets. The policy recommendations developed by the Youth Council were comprehensive and evidence-based, reflecting both their personal experiences and their engagement with research and advocacy training provided by Centerpoint. George was impressed by their knowledge and professionalism, which challenged stereotypes about young people in crisis. After the formal meeting, George and William joined the council members for lunch in Centerpoint's communal dining room. The casual environment allowed for more personal conversations that deepened George's understanding of the individual stories behind the policy discussions. He found himself sitting next to Tomas, a 21-year-old former unaccompanied minor who had arrived in Britain as a refugee at 16. Tomas's journey from sleeping rough to studying engineering at university illustrated both the potential within Centerpoint's client population and the complex challenges faced by young refugees. When I first came here, I couldn't speak English very well and I didn't understand how anything worked, Tomas explained. The staff helped me with language classes and explained things about British culture that I needed to know. George was fascinated by Tomas's descriptions of adapting to a completely different society while simultaneously dealing with trauma from his experiences in his home country. That must have been really scary, he observed. Yes, it was, Tomas agreed. But also exciting because there were opportunities here that I never could have had at home. Centerpoint helped me see that even though my situation was difficult, I could still achieve my goals. The conversation with Tomas highlighted another dimension of youth homelessness that George hadn't previously considered, the intersection with immigration and refugee issues. He began to understand how multiple forms of vulnerability could compound to create particularly complex challenges. During the afternoon, they visited Centerpoint's education and training facilities, where young people worked on qualifications and job skills while receiving ongoing support. The atmosphere was purposeful but relaxed, with staff and residents interacting as collaborators rather than in traditional service provider-client relationships. In the digital media workshop, George met Zara, an 18-year-old who was developing graphic design skills while completing her A-levels through distance learning. Her talent was evident in the professional quality work displayed around the room, but her educational path had been disrupted by family breakdown and subsequent homelessness. "I want to study art and design at university," Zara explained as she showed George her portfolio. "But first I need to finish my A-levels and build up enough savings to support myself during studies." George was struck by how similar Zara's academic interests were to his own creative pursuits, yet how different their pathways to achievement needed to be. While he could focus entirely on learning and personal development, she had to balance education with survival and financial independence. "Your artwork is really good," George told her genuinely. "I hope you get to study what you want." Zara's face lit up at this encouragement. "Thank you. It helps to know that people believe in what I'm trying to do." This exchange illustrated something that William had observed throughout their visits: the power of recognition and encouragement from people in positions of influence. For young people who had experienced rejection and marginalization, having their aspirations validated by respected figures could provide crucial psychological support. The life skills workshops revealed another crucial aspect of Centerpoint's approach. Young people worked on practical capabilities like budgeting, cooking, and tenancy management while also developing emotional intelligence and conflict resolution skills that many had missed during disrupted childhoods. George observed a session on relationship building where participants practiced communication techniques for managing workplace interactions, romantic partnerships, and friendships. The complexity of these discussions highlighted how homelessness affected not just housing but every aspect of social development. "When you've been hurt by the people who were supposed to care for you," explained workshop leader Sarah, "learning to trust and connect with others safely becomes really challenging. We work on building those skills alongside the practical ones." The therapeutic dimension of this work impressed both George and William. Traditional homeless services often focused primarily on accommodation and employment, but Centerpoint's holistic approach recognized that young people needed emotional healing and social skill development to achieve lasting stability. During a break in the workshop schedule, George found himself in conversation with several residents who were curious about his experiences and perspectives. Rather than treating him as a celebrity, they engaged with him as another young person, asking about his interests and sharing their own. "What do you want to do when you're older?" asked Jade, a 17-year-old who was studying childcare while living at Centerpoint. George considered this question seriously. "I'm supposed to be king someday," he said thoughtfully. "But I want to make sure I can help people like my father does. That's why I'm learning about important problems like homelessness." His honest response sparked a deeper conversation about leadership and responsibility that continued throughout the afternoon. The young people at Centerpoint had strong opinions about political leadership and social policy, informed by their direct experience of system failures and successes. "We need leaders who actually understand what it's like for young people who don't have advantages," Jordan observed. "Someone who's willing to listen and learn, not just make assumptions." George nodded earnestly. "I think that's why these visits are important. I can't understand unless I meet people and hear their stories." This exchange highlighted the mutual educational value of these encounters. While George was learning about social issues, the young people at Centerpoint were gaining insight into the royal family's genuine commitment to social justice and their openness to being influenced by direct experience. As the day concluded, the Youth Council reconvened to share their reflections on the visit and discuss potential ongoing collaboration. The enthusiasm from both sides was evident, with several participants suggesting that George could become an honorary Youth Council member who continued to engage with their policy development work. Emma, in her role as council chair, formally thanked George and William for their participation. "Your visit today felt different from other official visits we've had," she said. "You didn't just observe us, you engaged with our ideas and shared your own thoughts." That makes us feel like partners rather than just examples. George's response revealed how much the experience had affected him. "Thank you for teaching me so much," he said earnestly. "I want to keep learning from all of you and find ways to help support the work you're doing." The drive back to Kensington Palace was filled with reflection on the day's experiences. George had been particularly moved by the resilience and ambition of the young people he had met, many of whom were pursuing educational and career goals despite facing obstacles that would have overwhelmed many adults. "They're just like me in many ways," George observed to his father. "They want to achieve things and help other people. They've just had harder circumstances to deal with." William smiled at his son's insight. "That's exactly right, George. And that's why your support and advocacy can make such a difference. When you treat people as equals and recognize their potential, it helps change how society sees them too." This conversation represented another milestone in George's developing social consciousness. He was moving beyond sympathy for people in difficult circumstances toward recognition of shared humanity and common aspirations that transcended social and economic differences. That evening, George excitedly shared his experiences with Catherine and his siblings, describing the Youth Council members' policy recommendations and their individual stories with the same enthusiasm he typically reserved for sports or adventure activities. His ability to articulate complex social issues and maintain sustained interest suggested that these experiences were genuinely shaping his identity rather than simply fulfilling educational requirements. Catherine listened with pride as George explained concepts like practice independence and trauma-informed care to Charlotte and Louis, demonstrating his growing sophistication about social policy while maintaining age-appropriate language for his younger siblings. "George is developing into quite the social advocate," she observed to William as they prepared for bed later that evening. "I'm amazed by how naturally he connects with people and how seriously he takes these issues," William replied. "He's not just going through the motions, he genuinely cares and wants to make a difference." Outside the palace windows, London continued its endless rhythm, including hundreds of young people who would sleep rough that night despite the excellent work being done by organizations like Centrepoint. But, in the royal nursery, 3 young minds were developing an understanding of social responsibility that offered hope for more engaged and effective leadership in the future. George's journey of discovery was expanding beyond homelessness to encompass broader questions of social justice, equality, and the role of leadership in addressing systemic challenges. The combination of direct experience, thoughtful guidance, and his own natural empathy was creating a foundation for the kind of compassionate monarchy that could inspire real social change. As he fell asleep, George's mind was filled with images of the remarkable young people he had met, Emma's confident leadership, Tomas's determination to succeed despite enormous obstacles, Zara's artistic talent flourishing despite educational disruption. These were no longer statistics about youth homelessness but real individuals whose courage and resilience would influence his understanding of royal duty for years to come. The winter months following George's intensive education about homelessness brought an unexpected opportunity to put his newfound knowledge and passion into meaningful action. The royal household had received countless invitations for George to participate in various charitable activities, but it was his own initiative that led to the most significant development in his emerging social advocacy. During a family dinner conversation about Christmas traditions, George had asked why the royal family opened presents on Christmas Eve while many people had no presents at all. His question sparked a broader discussion about privilege and responsibility that continued for several days, with George proposing that the family should do something special for people experiencing homelessness during the holiday season. "Could we invite some of the people we met to have Christmas dinner with us?" George had suggested earnestly. "I know Eleanor and Marcus and the others probably don't have families to celebrate with." While logistical and security constraints made a royal Christmas dinner impossible, George's impulse toward inclusive celebration inspired William and Catherine to develop a more feasible but equally meaningful alternative. They would organize a special Christmas event at Centrepoint, bringing together young people from the organization with volunteers, staff, and special guests for an evening of celebration and community building. The planning process became an education in itself for George, who worked closely with Centrepoint staff to design an event that would be meaningful for participants rather than simply ceremonial. He insisted that the evening should include activities that allowed everyone to contribute something valuable, rather than positioning the royal family as benefactors dispensing charity to grateful recipients. It should feel like a real party where everyone belongs, George explained to Emma during one of several planning calls they held in the weeks leading up to the event. The youth council chair had become an unofficial advisor to George on youth homelessness issues, and their regular conversations had deepened both their mutual respect and their shared commitment to effective advocacy. Emma's perspective on the Christmas event reflected the sophisticated understanding of dignity and empowerment that characterized Centerpoint's approach. "The best thing about this idea is that you're not trying to save us," she told George directly. "You're trying to celebrate with us. That makes us feel like real people, not just problems to be solved." The Christmas celebration was scheduled for December 22 at Centerpoint's main facility, with plans for approximately 50 participants including current residents, recent graduates, staff members, volunteers, and special guests. Rather than a formal dinner with speeches, the evening would feature collaborative cooking, games, music, and storytelling that encouraged natural interaction across traditional social boundaries. George had specifically requested that the event include opportunities for participants to share their talents and achievements, ensuring that the focus would be on recognizing everyone's contributions rather than highlighting the royal family's presence. This approach reflected his growing understanding that effective social engagement required genuine mutuality rather than one-way charitable giving. On the day of the event, George could barely contain his excitement as he and William prepared to leave Kensington Palace. He had spent weeks working on a presentation about his experiences learning about homelessness, planning to share his journey of discovery with the Centerpoint community and explain how they had influenced his understanding of social responsibility. "Are you nervous about your speech tonight?" William asked as they traveled through London's busy pre-Christmas traffic. "A little bit," George admitted. "But mostly I'm excited to see everyone again and share what I've learned." Emma says some of the council members have achievements they want to celebrate too. The reciprocal nature of the planned presentations illustrated how George's relationship with these organizations had evolved beyond traditional royal patronage toward genuine collaboration and mutual learning. His presentation would be balanced by recognition of participants' accomplishments, creating a dynamic where everyone had something valuable to contribute. Centerpoint's building had been decorated for the occasion, with artwork created by residents displayed alongside traditional Christmas decorations. The atmosphere was festive but warm, reflecting the community-oriented culture that characterized the organization's daily operations. Sayabakan welcomed the royal visitors with the comfortable familiarity that had developed through months of collaboration. "Prince George, the young people have been looking forward to this evening for weeks," he said warmly. "Your enthusiasm for this project has been inspiring for everyone involved." The evening began in the communal kitchen, where participants worked in mixed groups to prepare a feast featuring dishes from various cultural backgrounds represented within the Centerpoint community. George found himself working alongside Tomas and Aisha, learning to make traditional Eritrean injera bread while sharing stories about his own family's Christmas traditions. The collaborative cooking created natural conversation opportunities that broke down social barriers more effectively than any structured icebreaker activity. George's genuine interest in learning new cooking techniques and cultural traditions positioned him as a fellow participant rather than a distinguished guest, exactly as he had hoped. "You're getting better at this," Aisha observed as George successfully flipped a piece of injera without tearing it. "Maybe you should consider a career in catering if the king thing doesn't work out." Her playful teasing reflected the comfortable rapport that had developed between George and the Centerpoint young people through their ongoing interactions. They treated him as a peer who happened to have unusual responsibilities rather than as a celebrity requiring special deference. Marcus, who had joined their cooking group after completing his preparations for Ethiopian Darawat, shared updates on his progress since their previous meeting. "I finished my housing application," he announced proudly. "Should hear back about a flat in January." "Scary but exciting." George's face lit up at this news. "That's brilliant," he exclaimed genuinely. "Will you get to decorate it however you want?" The conversation about Marcus's housing prospects revealed how significant this milestone was for his long-term stability and independence. Moving from supported accommodation to independent tenancy represented both an achievement and a challenge that required ongoing emotional and practical support. The scariest part is that it'll be just me, Marcus admitted. No staff around if something goes wrong. But I think I'm ready for that responsibility now. William, who was working with a different cooking group but listening to nearby conversations, was struck by the matter-of-fact courage required for transitions that most people took for granted. The simple act of signing a lease represented a major life achievement for someone who had experienced homelessness. As the cooking progressed, the kitchen filled with the aromas of diverse cuisines and the sounds of laughter and animated conversation. George moved between different cooking stations, helping where needed while learning about various cultural traditions and personal stories from his fellow participants. In one corner, Jordan was teaching a group of volunteers how to make proper Caribbean rice and peas while explaining his recent acceptance to study social work at university. His plans to specialize in youth services reflected a common pattern among Centerpoint graduates who chose to dedicate their careers to helping others facing similar challenges. "I want to give back," Jordan explained to George when asked about his career choice. "The support I received here changed my life, and I want to do the same for other young people." This commitment to service despite personal challenges impressed George, who was beginning to understand how often people who had received help became motivated to help others. It challenged assumptions about dependency and demonstrated the transformative potential of effective support programs. The dinner itself was served buffet-style in the main community room, with participants sitting at mixed tables that encouraged cross-pollination of conversations and perspectives. George found himself at a table with Emma, two recent Centerpoint graduates, a volunteer coordinator, and Dr. Morrison, who had joined the celebration as recognition of her role in facilitating George's educational journey. The conversation at their table ranged widely, from policy discussions about youth homelessness prevention to lighter topics about favorite movies and travel aspirations. George contributed naturally to both serious and casual discussions, demonstrating his growing comfort with treating these relationships as genuine friendships rather than formal charitable obligations. "What's the most important thing you've learned this year?" Dr. Morrison asked George during a lull in the conversation. George considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "I think I've learned that helping people isn't about giving them things they don't have," he said slowly. "It's about recognizing what they already have and supporting them to use it." Emma nodded approvingly at this response. "That's exactly what good support looks like," she agreed. "Treating people like they have potential, not like they're broken." This exchange illustrated how George's understanding of effective social intervention had evolved through his direct experiences with homelessness services. Rather than developing a paternalistic approach to charity, he had learned to recognize the agency and capability that existed within marginalized communities. After dinner, the evening's entertainment featured performances and presentations by participants showcasing their diverse talents. Zara shared some of her graphic design work, including a poster she had created advocating for better support for care leavers. Kyle performed an original song he had written about resilience and hope. Several other participants shared poetry, comedy, and musical performances that demonstrated the creativity and talent that flourished when basic needs were met. George's presentation came toward the end of the program, by which point the audience was relaxed and engaged rather than formally attentive. He had prepared a brief talk about his learning journey, illustrated with photos from his visits and quotes from the people who had taught him about homelessness. 6 months ago, I didn't really understand what homelessness meant, George began, speaking without notes to maintain eye contact with his audience. "I thought it was just about not having a house. But all of you have taught me that it's much more complicated than that." He went on to describe specific lessons he had learned from individuals in the room, acknowledging their contributions to his education while sharing how these experiences had influenced his perspective on leadership and social responsibility. "Eleanor taught me that everyone has a story that deserves respect," he continued, referring to the nurse he had met at the passage. "Marcus showed me that creativity can flourish even in difficult circumstances. Emma and the Youth Council helped me understand that young people can be leaders and experts on the issues affecting their lives." The personalized recognition in George's presentation moved several participants to tears, not because of sentimentality but because of the genuine respect and acknowledgement it represented. For young people who had often been defined by their problems rather than their potential, being publicly recognized for their positive contributions was profoundly validating. George concluded his presentation with a commitment that surprised even his father. "I want to continue learning from all of you and working together on these issues," he announced. "Emma and I have been talking about ways I can support the Youth Council's advocacy work, and I hope we can develop real partnerships that make a difference." The spontaneous applause that followed reflected not just appreciation for George's words but excitement about the collaborative relationship he was proposing. Rather than offering traditional royal patronage, he was suggesting genuine partnership that recognized everyone's capacity to contribute to social change. Emma's response presentation focused on the policy recommendations that the Youth Council had been developing, with specific acknowledgement of how George's questions and perspectives had influenced their thinking. "Having someone our age engage seriously with these issues has made us think differently about how to communicate with young people who have advantages," she explained. This mutual influence illustrated the bidirectional nature of effective social engagement. While George had been educated about homelessness by the young people he met, his participation had also influenced their approaches to advocacy and communication. The evening concluded with informal socializing that extended well beyond the planned schedule, as participants were reluctant to end the celebration. George found himself in a corner conversation with several Centerpoint graduates who were sharing their post-program experiences and ongoing challenges. "The hardest part isn't getting housed," explained Jade, who had been living independently for 8 months. "It's dealing with the loneliness and building new friendships when you don't have the shared experiences that most people your age have." This insight highlighted an aspect of homelessness recovery that George hadn't previously considered: the social and emotional challenges of reintegration that persisted long after housing stability was achieved. The conversation deepened his understanding of why ongoing community connections were so important for long-term success. "Do you stay in touch with each other?" George asked, genuinely curious about how relationships formed at Centerpoint evolved after graduation. "Some of us do," Jordan replied. "But it's complicated because you want to move forward with your life while also maintaining connections to people who understand what you've been through." This tension between progress and continuity reflected broader challenges of social mobility and identity that extended well beyond homelessness. George was beginning to appreciate the complex psychological and social dynamics involved in major life transitions. As the evening wound down, participants began exchanging contact information and making plans for future gatherings. The organic emergence of ongoing social connections had been one of George's hopes for the event, and seeing it materialize validated his belief in the power of authentic community building. "This felt different from other events," Tomas observed as he said goodbye to George. "It felt like we were all just people who happened to come together, not like some people were helping other people." This distinction captured exactly what George had hoped to achieve through the collaborative approach to the celebration. By positioning everyone as contributors rather than dividing participants into helpers and recipients, the evening had created genuine community rather than charitable theater. The drive back to Kensington Palace was filled with reflection on the evening's successes and discussion of next steps for the ongoing relationships George had committed to maintaining. William was struck by the naturalness with which his son had navigated complex social dynamics while remaining true to his own personality and values. "How do you feel about the commitments you made tonight?" William asked, referring to George's promise to continue working with the Youth Council on advocacy projects. Excited but also nervous, George replied honestly. "I want to make sure I can actually be helpful and not just someone who shows up occasionally and expects praise." This self-awareness about the potential pitfalls of celebrity activism impressed William, who recognized how carefully George was thinking about authentic engagement versus performative charity. His son's maturity in considering these distinctions suggested that his social advocacy would be sustained and meaningful rather than superficial. Over the following days, the impact of the Christmas celebration extended far beyond the participants who had attended. Media coverage focused on the collaborative nature of the event and George's emerging role as a youth advocate for homelessness issues. More importantly, several other youth homelessness organizations had reached out to inquire about similar partnership opportunities. The Youth Council at Centerpoint had decided to formalize George's involvement by creating an advisory role that would allow him to contribute to their policy development work while continuing his education about social issues. Emma had outlined a program of monthly virtual meetings supplemented by quarterly in-person sessions that would accommodate George's school schedule while maintaining meaningful engagement. "What I love about this arrangement is that it treats George like a real partner," Emma explained to William during a planning call. "He brings a unique perspective as someone our age who will have significant influence in the future. We bring expertise on youth homelessness. Together we can probably accomplish more than either of us could alone." This partnership model represented an evolution in royal engagement with social causes that reflected both George's genuine commitment and the organization's recognition of his potential value as a long-term advocate. Rather than traditional patronage relationships, they were developing collaborative structures that leveraged everyone's strengths. George's involvement with the Youth Council had also inspired similar interest from his siblings. Charlotte had asked detailed questions about the gender-specific challenges faced by young women experiencing homelessness, while Louis wanted to know whether there were programs to help homeless people who had pets. Their curiosity suggested that George's advocacy was creating a culture of social awareness within the royal family's next generation. "The children are all developing their own interests within this broader area of social justice," Catherine observed to William as they watched George work on a presentation for his next youth council meeting. "It's wonderful to see them finding their own ways to contribute rather than just following predetermined paths." As winter turned toward spring, George's commitment to homelessness advocacy had become integrated into his identity in ways that went far beyond charitable obligation. His school had supported his involvement by allowing him to develop independent research projects related to his youth council work, while his teachers had noted improvements in his analytical thinking and communication skills. The relationship with Centerpoint had also opened George's eyes to connections between homelessness and other social issues, including education inequality, healthcare access, and criminal justice reform. His questions during youth council meetings often revealed these intersections, leading to more comprehensive discussions about systemic social challenges. "George has a talent for seeing the bigger picture," Emma had observed to her fellow council members. "He asks questions that help us think about how different problems connect to each other." This analytical approach reflected both George's natural intelligence and the comprehensive education he was receiving about social systems through his advocacy work. Rather than learning about homelessness in isolation, he was developing an understanding of how various social and economic factors created vulnerability while also identifying potential intervention points. The success of George's engagement with homelessness issues had also attracted attention from other areas of social policy. Organizations working on education access, environmental justice, and healthcare equity had reached out to explore potential collaboration with the young prince, whose authentic commitment had impressed observers across the charitable sector. However, George and his parents had decided to maintain focus on homelessness advocacy for the foreseeable future, recognizing that meaningful impact required sustained engagement rather than scattered attention across multiple causes. This decision reflected growing sophistication about effective social engagement that prioritized depth over breadth. "I want to really understand these issues before moving on to learn about other problems," George explained when declining an invitation to visit an environmental conservation project. "Emma and the others have taught me so much, but I feel like I'm just getting started." This commitment to sustained learning and relationship building distinguished George's approach from traditional royal charitable engagement. Rather than ceremonial visits to numerous organizations, he was developing expertise and authentic partnerships that could influence policy and practice over the long term. As the first anniversary of his initial visit to the Passage approached, George had already begun planning a reflection event that would bring together representatives from all the organizations he had worked with to assess progress and identify future priorities. His vision for this gathering reflected his growing understanding of collaborative advocacy and his desire to facilitate connections between different approaches to addressing homelessness. "I want everyone to share what they've learned this year and think together about what we could accomplish if we coordinated our efforts better," George explained to William as they discussed the event planning. This systems thinking approach to social change demonstrated remarkable sophistication for someone his age while reflecting the high-quality education he was receiving from the practitioners and advocates who had become his teachers and partners. Looking ahead, George's journey with homelessness advocacy seemed likely to evolve into lifelong engagement that could significantly influence both royal traditions and social policy. His authentic relationships with people affected by these issues, combined with his growing platform and influence, create